Thought I'd take a few minutes and go ahead and describe this transfer switch. So there's a great big relay inside, a contactor. I've worked with these enough to know, just by looking at it, which connection does what. When you have generator power coming in, it energizes the coil, which engages that relay. So that means that this set of contacts right here and here, this would be the first, second, third. So it's the middle contact and wires. That's our generator power input. Back here, this is our output. So whichever power source is coming in, whether it's this one or this one, it travels through this little brass colored contact, through this little wire, and then out this. And then this one here, the normally open position on the relay, of course, that's our shore power input. I've cleaned up the wiring a lot in here, kind of tucked everything out of the way. The wire that originally went from this set of connections to my AC electrical panel, I have pulled that out and rerouted over to the AC output of the inverter. So what that means is that I need to connect a new wire to the output of the transfer switch, which then connects to the AC input of the inverter. So the path of power will be, whether it's shore power or generator, coming in to the transfer switch, goes through the transfer switch, out this wire, travels over to the inverter's AC input, another transfer switch engages in the inverter, and then that sends power through to my electrical panel. So I've already got a piece of wire cut here, and we'll go ahead and get this installed. Just bend my ground wire over here, kind of route it somewhat out of the way and whatnot. Snug that down tight. So then my black wire, I'm actually using new wire nuts. Wire nuts are really only good for one-time use. And then I'll just tuck this wire down like that. Route everything so it's nowhere near the relay contacts to interfere with the movement of the relay. And prior to disassembling all of this wiring here, I marked out which one was which. These other two, I didn't disconnect those, but I marked which one was shore power, which one was generator power, and which one would be output from the transfer switch to my inverter. And then my new wire, I labeled that also. Okay, that is done. Looks much better than how this was wired from the RV factory. And since I'm done with that, I think I'll go ahead and put my lid back on it. I don't foresee any need to get in there again. I'll just double check all my connections and wires. Yeah, we should be good. It's got little locking tabs here. There's some on the back side also. And here's the inverter, Victron Multiplus 2000. So my AC connections are right there, and here's my original wire, and then here's my new one. So I have a cover that goes over this box here. I need to slide these wires through the hole on that cover, and then kind of tuck the cover down out of the way, and then can make these connections and then slide the cover back in place. That is one thing that I am not too fond of about this particular inverter, is the difficulty in making your connections and also dealing with that little cover plate. Inside of the inverter, we've got our positive cable right here, and our negative cable is right there. This is a standard Ethernet cable that connects to one of two ports for our VE.Bus system, and this goes over to my color controlled GX remote monitor panel. I do also need to connect a chassis ground wire from here to the grounding point of the truck camper. And here's this little cover I was talking about. I've got my wires tucked through. I've got everything stripped and ready to connect. We'll zoom in just a little bit here and I'll give you a close-up of making those wire connections. If you look closely, you'll see that one of those wires is cut shorter than the other. This one here. The reason for that is, in this case, the AC input is and the neutral wire is in the middle. Over here we have our hot wire is shorter, that one's in the middle. The best technique to use here is to spread all your wires out so they're spaced the appropriate distance from each other so that they all line up with the terminals, and then cut them all so that they're the same length. On the AC input wire, I used a pair of needle nose pliers to put a little bit of a bend in the ground wire, and then my fingers to put a bend in the hot wire. Once you have the spacing for all of these wires worked out to what they'll be here, then that's when you would want all three of these cut to the same length. Now that I've trimmed those, I need to come back in and strip a little bit more insulation off my hot wire. And this is where it gets tricky, especially with my limited space down here at the bottom of the inverter, is getting the wires in place with this crazy cover. I don't know why these holes here aren't cut like they are on the battery cables. They're just great big slots for the battery cables, so you would not need to fight with it like this. You could just drop it down over the top. This is the second RV that I've installed this inverter in. I had it in my last RV for about a year or so, maybe. I really liked it, combined with the color controlled GX monitor panel and my BMV-712 battery monitor. So all of that stuff, I pulled it out of that RV when I sold it. And just make note, these are not in the same order from one side to the other. And then of course here's where we end up fighting with this cover some more. Because I had the cover situated at an angle, there was no way I was going to get it in place until I disconnected the wires and then dropped the cover perfectly vertical down into the spot that it was meant to mount in. So what I did was disconnected my wires, slid the wires back out of the grommets a little bit, and then dropped the cover down into place, and then pulled the cover back just a little bit where I could see my wire connections, and then I moved the wires slightly up into the terminal strips and then was able to tighten them down, and then moved the cover back into place and then screwed it down. So let's try this again. Okay, I have my AC input wires snugged up in there. Okay, those are in position now. And just double check that everything is still lined up in the right terminal like it should be. These strain reliefs, they also have a little rubber insert. I specifically remember having a little bit of trouble, now that I'm thinking about it more, of sliding this cover in and out with having those rubber grommets in on my last RV. So this time I took those grommets out and I'm not going to use them. My last step in completing the inverter installation is to install a chassis ground wire. So I have a piece of green 10 gauge stranded THHN wire crimped a terminal onto one end of it, and that will go right there on that chassis grounding lug. So then I'll route that wire underneath the freshwater fill hose all the way up here across the top of the inverter and then over there, and then I'll attach it to this lug right there.